Millions of people throughout the world today owe their lives to a discovery made in Calcutta at the turn of the century. It was discovered that the female Anopheles mosquito transmitted malaria from one person to another. Sir Ronald Ross commemorated this discovery by a poem.
This day relenting God hath placed within my hand a wondrous thing, and God be praised at his command, seeking his secret deeds with tears and toiling breath. I find thy cunning seeds, O million murdering death. I know this little thing a myriad men will save. O death, where is thy sting, thy victory, O grave?
Ross's work in this small laboratory continues to inspire India's efforts in her war against malaria. Malaria anywhere in the country brings men and material to combat the scourge at its source. The National Malaria Eradication Program is today welcomed in every village. But it wasn't so for a long time, as Malaria Inspector Harpal Singh will tell you.
Let's see. Almost 7 months. Not since the rainy season. We could not have imagined all the problems. Religion, caste, superstition, locked houses. The hardest part, I think, was to get them to understand why we had to keep on spraying year after year. India has many people, but I think it has many more walls. And behind the walls, so many sick. Yes, another victim. Every time we spray, we kill malaria-carrying mosquitoes. If there is no spraying, we find people sick with malaria.
Years ago, whenever the weather was warm and humid, malaria swept across the land. 100 million people were struck down by malaria every year. 1 million died. Only the female Anopheles mosquito transmits malaria. But as they say in the murder mysteries, she usually makes one fatal mistake. Having fed on man, heavy with blood, she flies to the nearest wall or ceiling and settles there to rest and digest her meal. If the surface has been sprayed with DDT, the mosquito will die before it can infect another person. This is how the transmission of malaria is interrupted. To help further, drugs are also used in the total war against malaria. Armed with this knowledge, the people of India launched a countrywide program of malaria eradication. The people of India are assisted by the people of the United States of America through their foreign aid program. Help also comes from the World Health Organization. Located in Delhi, these are the headquarters of the Malaria Eradication Program. Here, NMEP's energetic director, assisted by his staff and advisors from the US Agency for International Development and the World Health Organization, plans a strategy for the campaign against malaria. Regional offices, arms of the National Malaria Eradication Program headquarters, help the states. The task of executing the program in each state rests with its Directorate of Health. By 1958, India's war against malaria had become the largest public health program in the history of mankind. Soon, huge shipments of DDT began to arrive in the Indian ports. DDT is the ammunition needed to wipe out an age-old enemy that ravaged our people living in 500,000 villages, to free our choked agricultural and industrial development, to eradicate malaria from India. An army of malaria workers numbering 160,000 were recruited. Recruits were trained at NMEP. Their training covered specialized laboratory work and field operations. Classroom lectures were supplemented by actual field work. Trainees learned to make use of the latest development in new insecticides, blood examination, animal resistance to malaria, mosquito studies, dissection of glands, testing of anti-malarial drugs, parasite investigation, research for new insecticides, mosquito resistance to insecticides, and so on. Spray nozzles must be checked and adjusted for specified rate of DDT discharge. Proper maintenance of spray equipment must continue to keep the gear in fighting trim. Thousands of spraymen were trained to spray meticulously, for they must spray every house all over India. The supervisors were trained for field work. They learned to pinpoint and rectify lapses in spraying and surveillance. With the mobilization of the trained personnel and their fighting gear came the attack. Here is just one of the 393 field units that work throughout the country. Each unit must protect over 1 million people. The attack was carried to every corner of the country. The sprayman, the DDT, and the spraying equipment was moved by every available means of transport. India is a country of great contrast in terrain, climate, and people. It's no mean achievement to cover the far-flung flood areas, deserts, hills, and forests. Truly, this is a campaign of tremendous scope with formidable problems of logistics. When the malaria team arrives in a village, team leaders must assemble the village elders, explain the purpose of their visit, and ask for their full cooperation. Their cooperation is essential for good work. Children, pets, and other desired movable items must be brought out, and food must be protected before spraying can begin. In 1 year alone, at the height of attack, India used over 67 million pounds of DDT to eradicate malaria. Inspectors must examine the walls and ceilings for proper deposit of DDT. No dark corner must be left out. The surveillance phase begins after constant spraying results in drastically reducing malaria cases. More than 60,000 surveillance personnel must visit every house of the country, not every year, not every month, but every fortnight. These measures consolidate the gains achieved. So every fortnight for several years, every house must be visited and their inhabitants interviewed by a surveillance worker to detect a few remaining cases of malaria. His work is regularly checked by responsible supervisory officials. City hospitals and dispensaries, along with the rural health centers, must help in these surveillance operations. Private medical practitioners are also required to participate in the malaria eradication program. It is an all-out war against malaria. Every citizen must cooperate. Whenever a case of fever is located, it must be treated carefully. Blood samples must be taken to ascertain the presence of malaria. If the blood smear shows malaria, a whole new sequence of events begins. The patient is given full treatment. Fresh blood samples are also taken from all neighbors. Special spraying is carried out in the area. The surveillance must continue until malaria has been eradicated. Surveillance must go on even after malaria has been eradicated. Achieved eradication of malaria must be maintained. Only continued surveillance can ensure higher production through healthy and prosperous workers.
We have been doing well for the last about 3 years. And there have been...
Once a year, the Government of India obtains the services of malaria experts from other countries to join them in field evaluation. Several joint teams of these experts inspect operations throughout the country.
राम राम बाबू।
राम राम।
आपके घर में कोई बीमार तो कौन है?
बच्चा बीमार थे।
वह कोई बीमार?
बच्चा।
दो तो कोई चिंता है। तो कोई नहीं। You must go and see. मैं देख लेना है ना।
देख ले।
चलो तो बताओ कौन?
A special committee of consultants ponders over the findings of the various independent appraisal teams of malaria experts from USAID and WHO. Deliberations made here result in recommendations for future operations. Recommendations made here are approved in the Ministry of Health, Government of India by a high-level group of civil and military officials headed by India's Director General of Health Services. Where does the campaign stand now? Our Health Minister says,
now we have completed malaria eradication in more than 50% of the country, which is in maintenance phase. Another 36% of the country is in advanced stage of consolidation, and 14% only is in an attack phase, mainly along the border areas. The one or two forest areas within the country are also in the attack phase.
And at the World Health Organization, the regional director says,
the most essential point to remember now is that we must not relax our efforts. It is equally important that all the countries in this region should cooperate in malaria eradication and coordinate all their various activities.
Malaria is not yet completely banished from India. Its return is still a possibility unless all the people participate in the vigilance campaign. Malaria eradication has resulted in many benefits. In the Terai area of northern India, impenetrable jungles, since time immemorial, ridden with disease almost useless to man, have now been cleared. Thousands of acres have been put under cultivation to produce the food India so desperately needs. Unfinished rail links in central India, which could not be finished for decades due to malaria, are now being completed, opening up a whole new storehouse of resources, vital to economic development. Temples of New India, as Prime Minister Nehru called them, dams and river valley projects now being built in lands that were once uninhabitable, abandoned to malaria. New canal systems have been built to irrigate acres of parched land only after the area has been declared free from malaria. These are the great works set in motion by the conquest of malaria. New ventures, new power, and a budding industrial revolution to change the face of India. Today, millions of people are free from malaria, free to work, free to look forward to a new era of nation building. But vigilance must continue.